It started when I was 3 years old. One night, I awoke to find a small childlike figure in bed with me. He was about 2 feet tall and had the features of a small child, but its head was swollen well beyond a normal size. It was wearing a blue gown with the hands not visible at the end of the sleeves. It was moving its mouth and talking in gibberish. The figure was as real as I was, and it was surrounded by a kind of glowing haze. I ran to my parents' bedroom and woke my dad, but of course, he told me to go back to sleep. So I returned to my room, and now the figure was standing on my bed. I grabbed a pillow and covered my face, and jumped on the bed. It was gone. That started something that would last the next 26 years. I'll condense the years up until 1990. Those appearances, while still frightening, never really made me feel threatened. During this period, which included teenage years, I saw the figure with the same frequency. My bedroom is located at the end of the hallway with 2 other bedrooms before mine. At the end of the hallway is a landing that blocks the view to the steps. From my bed, I could look out my window and down the hall to the landing and the top of the steps. I always knew right before the figure would appear, because the hair on the back of my neck would stand up and I would get uncontrollable chills. The figure would then appear either on top of the landing or come around the base of the landing and start down the hall towards my room. It never seemed to pay any attention to the other rooms at all. I would normally panic and either shut my door or run into my parents' room and sleep on the floor. Imagine finding your 18-year-old son curled up on your bedroom floor when you wake up in the morning. My parents and sister didn't really believe that I was seeing this apparition. I also would stay up late, being the night person that I am, and watch TV. In my living room, we have the stairs that led up to the second floor. It has a wooden railing on it that goes the length of the last 4 steps. I would often see the figure on the steps watching me from the 3rd or 4th step and then disappear. The only real changes during this time period were that the figure was losing its color and becoming more transparent. Now things would change drastically. A neighbor, with some knowledge of this sort of activity, told me to confront the figure and tell it to leave and never come back. I was to tell it that I was its power source and I was shutting off the power. I did this and enjoyed about a year of no sightings. Around this time, I told the story to my girlfriend of the time. She thought that its description sounded like a baby with water on the brain and still wearing its gown from the hospital. She thought that it was a lost soul trying to contact me to help it with some task so that it could finally rest in peace. I started to look into the house's history and my family's. The house sits on land that was farmland and a dirt road only 150 years ago. The land was owned by one man, and he had his farm and homestead around the area of my house. The main house of the estate is 1 block from my house and is still standing. My house is 40 years old, and we are the second family to live in it. The couple before us had no children that we know about. I have a sister 3 years younger than me and no other siblings. I've asked my parents if they had a child that died that I was unaware of, but they didn't. So after all of my checking, I found that nothing could explain the apparition. After about a week of thinking about the interpretation my girlfriend had given, guilt of banishing the figure overcame me. I asked it to come back one night, and I told it I would help it. The very next night the sighting started again, but with much greater intensity. I can now say, never do what I did. Once it's gone, let it stay gone. The sightings would happen more frequently, and sometimes they would terrify me. The figure looked the same, but something was very different. I was sure what it was, but now, there was another force in addition to the familiar figure. I began to see small black colored creatures which I can only describe as imps. They were solid black, 1 to 2 feet tall, and ran around on all 4s. They appeared mostly in the living room and coming from the hall closet. Now to explain the rest of the house setup that pertains to the story. The man that lived here before us started to dig a basement, but he never completed it. All that remains is a 3 to 4 foot crawl space accessible from outside the house. The hall closet was to be the stairs down to the basement. He had started making the stairs going down, but he boarded it all up when he stopped digging the basement. The stairs going up to the second floor are directly over the would-be basement step in the hall closet, so there are 2 ways from inside the house to access the crawl space, if you really wanted to. Rip up the 3rd or 4th step of the stairs or knock out the back of the closet. I began to make the connection between where the figures appeared and where the access ways were. The sightings got more intense, and sometimes they even drove me from my house. Normally, my dog would sense a small figure and act funny when it was around, but now, when the imps appeared, my dog would be in a very deep sleep, and I could never wake him up. I would either leave the house and stay over at a friend's. Sometimes, I would be knocking on her door at 2 a.m. terrified. Other times, if I was able to get between them and the steps, I would make a run for it to my room or my parents' room, because even these creatures would not venture in the bedrooms. My mother was noticing my moods, and I had told her about the new happenings, so she told me to get her the next time I saw the figure or imps. The next time I saw the figure upstairs coming down the hall, I ran into her room and woke her up. I led her into the hall where the figure still was. I pointed to it, and it began to back away and go down the steps. I chased it down the third step where it vanished. While she could not see it, she could tell by my eye movements that I was watching something moving across the hall and steps. I think that's when my family started to believe a little. I became so used to these new additions because they never did any harm, but they did make me feel very uneasy. The figure was becoming even more transparent. Certain lamps in the house would go on and off by themselves, often with other witnesses around. I would hear the TV go on in the middle of the night when I knew no one was downstairs. I'd theorized that the figure needed help to appear because it was slowly fading away. I assumed the imps were helping him, but the figure was still fading. I was waiting for a new addition to the cast, so the figure could still appear, since I still hadn't figured out what it wanted me to do. The sighting stopped again for a few months. I spoke with a parapsychologist, but then decided to leave well enough alone. I didn't want things getting worse. I decided to go into the crawl space and check out the area under the stairs. I took my dog down there with me, and I crawled into the area. There had not been anyone under there for years before this. I found an old maid playing card with not a bit of dust on it right under the third step. We have wall-to-wall carpeting, so this did not fall through the joints. I hadn't seen that deck of cards for over 20 years, but here was one. It had one corner that looked like it had been dipped in acid, but the rest was in good shape. I took it and put it in a pocket Bible and put it in my car. The sighting started again, only very small. I would call my girlfriend on the cordless phone and tell her it's happening again, and then walk upstairs while still on the phone with her. The next time was the worst of all. The figure appeared very bright, like it did 10 years ago, but it didn't look very happy. The imps appeared again, but they were more bold this time. Then a 7-foot tall man-shaped black figure appeared. It looked like it was either made of smoke or some liquid. It looked semi-solid, and you couldn't see through it. At the same time, the room was filled with imps, and a bearded old man's face took shape on the wall and started mumbling. The face was about 6 foot high and 4 feet wide. The familiar figure looked like it was sorry for doing this to me. I left the house and sat in my car until dawn. I knew I had to confront this new entity and try to drive it away. I also figured that if it wanted me, it was going to get me either way, so I had nothing to lose. My sanity, life, and maybe my soul were on the line, and I honestly believe this was the only way to stop it before it branched out. I was the original power source, so I was going to shut off the power. The next night, I prayed for protection and the strength to drive this evil away. I had a Bible handy as I sat up as usual listening to my CDs. About 2 a.m., I noticed my dog was in one of those deep sleeps, and I began to look around. The figure and the tall black figure appeared along with the rest of the apparitions. I informed them in the calmest voice I could get at the time that I was taking away their power and they had no power over me. I told them my family, and my house was protected by God and they could not harm us. I walked right past the tall figure and the imps moved out of the way. I walked right up the steps and never looked back. That was about 2 years ago, and I've not seen them ever since. We placed the Bible on the stairs and a cross in the closet to block off their entrances. I still feel there is a presence there that tries to let me let it in. I still hear bumping and walking around, but the apparitions are gone, banished to the crawl space I assume. They will not get another portal in here, so they will remain there. We did have the house blessed years ago, everywhere except the crawl space. I think that might be the answer to end it for all good. Thanks for reading. After my senior prom, my buddies and I dropped off our old small-town Tennessee dates and headed to another friend's house to unwind. The prom had been tough on all of us. We never chose the right dates. and we were watching MTV on the couch. This was 1983, you know. After severe 2 a.m. boredom set in, one of my friends and I decided to go for a walk on the golf course behind the house and see if anyone else was up at this hour. We walked a short distance, really just from one fairway to the next, and looked with interest at this giant old tree next to the creek at the bottom of the hill. It was a dark, clear night, and my buddy Mike and I could make out something under the tree. I asked Mike what it looked like to him, and he agreed with me that it looked like two people and one of them was digging. I thought it was someone up to no good, and the last thing I wanted to do on prom night was get busted by the cops, so I said we should leave. At this point, Mike and I were about 300 yards away from the shadowy figures. We turned around and took about 2 steps before I looked back again. In that 1 second, the figures had gained about 1/3 of the distance between us and were closing in fast. Mike and I both screamed profanities and hightailed it for the house. I shouted, "Don't look back," because the people in the movies that get killed are the ones who look back, but I forgot to remind him of the little knee-high chain that keeps the golf carts from leaving the cart path. As he sprawled out on the dump grass, I jumped blindly, hoping I would miss the near-invisible chain. I made it and helped him up without looking back, and we made it safely inside. Imagine if you were our third friend. Of course, you would have to go see it for yourself. So after a tall glass of water, we weren't into drinking beer yet. We took Kermit outside. After a short briefing, we went to the top of the hill and let him go down to the scary part. After a few seconds, we heard that same 4-letter word, and here comes Kermit hustling up the hill. I was a little surprised that he was running so fast. He was a lot less chicken than we were, but there was no way anyone was going to beat me back to the house. In retrospect, we should have done some scientific tests or taken some pictures, but we were really tired and creeped out. Mostly tired since we had been dancing all night to Rick Springfield cover tunes. So we went back to Kermit's house and crashed. This story was mostly told as a funny icebreaker at boring parties later on, and we never thought much about it as the years passed. As a closing note, years later, when my folks finally joined that country club and I played golf there, I saw the 2 headstones of the farmer and his wife, who used to own the land a long time ago, that are buried near the 6th tee about 300 yards from where we saw those shadowy figures. My wife works at a residential care facility, and for the last month or so, they've been having trouble with the ghost of a lady who died there about 5 years ago. She was a very unhappy woman who didn't like anyone that worked in the complex. The only thing she seemed to enjoy was her pills. After her death, there was no sign of a ghost until they expanded the complex. Now they have problems every night. Almost all of the employees have seen her around the medication room. They say she is very small, about 5 feet tall, very solid looking, with no hands or face. They've also seen her walk through a solid oak door. Some nights they say she just goes back and forth between the new section and the original building. What is most alarming though, is that lately, she is becoming violent. Most of the experiences are mild, pinching, pushing, and such. However, it has taken a serious turn. One of the girls on Wednesday, January 17th, 1996, had a very large fire extinguisher thrown at her and was held captive in the elevator going up and down between floors for several minutes. On the following Thursday, one day, the girls reported that a large commercial refrigerator was rocking back and forth, like someone was trying to turn it over. The owner of the facility has also seen her and is planning on bringing in a psychic to tell her to move on. Thanks for reading. We own this farmhouse. It's haunted by a ghost named Catherine. The reason we know that the ghost name is Catherine is because one day, this lady stopped by and asked if she could see the house. We wanted to know why she wanted to see the house, and she told us that her father and grandfather built the house in 1900. Her grandmother, Catherine, loved the house. Catherine and her husband had to move. She didn't want to move because she loved her house and, while she was away, she died. I guess her spirit came back to the house. Let me tell you why I believe this. When we first bought the house, my Uncle Pat was living there. He would sleep in the living room of the house, and during the night, he would hear doors shut, and no one else was in the house. Plus, this happened more than one time. Then we rented the house to some people. We never told them about the door shutting. These people that were renting the house asked if the house was haunted because they could hear someone walk across the attic floor, slam a door, walk back across the floor, and slam another door. There are no doors up in the attic. When the renters moved out, my grandma and grandpa moved into the house. They said that they didn't hear anything. My Uncle Pat would sometimes come and visit them and stay in the guest bedroom, which we believe was Catherine's bedroom. All night long, we would hear something tapping on the window. There's nothing close to even touch the window. Also, Catherine has stared at my Uncle Pat, even called his name. One thing that freaks me out is that on New Year's Day, I had a dream, and in this dream, Catherine told me why she kept my Uncle Pat up at night. The day after I told my Uncle Pat this, he heard someone call his name, and everyone else in the house was sound asleep. I know that some of this may be hard to believe, but believe me, it is true, and I wouldn't make up a story like this. You just have to believe me. Thanks for reading. Joan and I live in the small town of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. It is located about 90 miles east of the Twin Cities. One evening, Joan drove to Minneapolis to pick up her daughter, who was attending school there. On the return trip, Joan let her daughter drive, and they both conversed about school and other events in their lives. It was approximately 10 at night, and small pockets of fog banks began to develop on the highway. Joan turned from looking at her daughter and yelled at her to slow down and avoid what looked to be a motorcyclist. She recalled seeing a leather jacket and various details of the bike, but she vividly remembers how the headlights reflected off the chrome of the bike, yet it went through at the same time. The motorcyclist was in front of their vehicle for about 5 seconds and then drove off into the ditch. Joan's daughter pulled over to the side of the road, and they both looked at each other and verified what they had both witnessed. Spooked out of their minds, they sped for home. They were traveling on Highway 29, which links I-94 to Green Bay. Currently, HY-29 is being expanded to a 4-lane highway due to the many fatal accidents that have occurred in the past. Thanks for reading. When I was a very young child, my parents rented an old German house. What made renting this house strange is that German families rarely rent out an entire house, especially to American servicemen and their families. The house is in 3 levels: the first floor, second floor, and the attic. The house was full of antique furniture. The service couple before us had moved out when their 6-month-old baby died of crypt death. So here we arrive, my stepfather, my mother, and me, 4 years old. The people that moved in upstairs were, not disrespect intended, very low-class people. The wife's name was Cookie. There were 2 boys, and the father, whose name and face I cannot remember. One day Cookie and my mother, bored in the German countryside and still no furniture to unpack, decided to explore the attic and its treasures. In a very old dresser, my mother found one drawer filled with family photographs going all the way back to the turn of the century. Her and Cookie felt amazed at the certainly important heirlooms left in the house by its owners, the Hummels. In the next drawer, my mother found many crucifixes, in many shapes and sizes. The next day, Cookie and my mother began to make a playground in the barn for us kids to play in. They found a well-like concrete hole in the middle of the barn. Inscribed in the concrete were the words Rommel 1943 and a swastika. What made this strange and even more scary was that in the courtyard was inscribed that the house belonged originally to the Schmidt family. My mother never allowed us to play in that concrete well. Soon after we all moved in, my mother and stepfather began hearing loud noises from upstairs, as if the furniture were being moved around. My mother thought that Cookie and her husband were trying to entertain us. With the noises, the crucifix began appearing all over the house. You would open a drawer, and there it would be. You open a closet door, and one would be hanging there. When my mother and Cookie were going to put them back, all the crucifixes would be moved to a different drawer. My memory and only memory of this time is when Cookie's sons tried to scare me by taking me up in the attic and throwing dead mice on me. I heard them screaming as if someone were beating them. When they ran down the stairs, I just had to see what scared them so. I saw a little girl sitting on one of the ancient cedar chests. She was very thin with little hair and very large brown eyes, giggling. Ever since, she was my imaginary friend. But the winds of change came. Cookie's husband was arrested for molesting me in the attic, an event that I can no longer recall. The accusations were very ugly, and I'm glad that I do not remember. but the German police would not let them be tried by American system and arrested him under German law. Cookie and her sons were moved out that day in a fear-for-life move, for she was the one that turned him in. My parents and myself were being moved 2 days later in fear-for-life move as well. It was those 2 days when my mother knew that Cookie wasn't the one moving the furniture in the attic and wasn't telling ghost stories to amuse us, but telling the truth. It all happened so fast that our furniture had arrived, yes, but we never opened a box. When we finally got to our new home and opened the last moving box, at the very bottom of the box was one of the most beautiful of the crosses, except for the out-of-place death shed. My stepfather took it and threw it away in the field 2 hours of a drive away. What about the Hummels? They were such nice people, my mother said. She didn't want to ask the antiques and family heirlooms. She figured there was a family member that they did not want to mention. What about the crosses? My mother found out that the crosses were strange, but the death shed was the sign of the SS. My mother also found out that there was a fairly unknown concentration camp nearby. Is it possible the house was commanded by an SS officer from a Jewish family? What about the children? Of the 4 children living in the house in the 3 months one died, 1 was raped, and 2 were subject to the harsh discipline of a father that seemed to change in that house. What about the giggling girl? She stayed with me, I remember, until I received a fractured skull from a wild horse. On the way to the hospital, I remember she said she had to leave me. I cried more from her saying goodbye than I did the 240 stitches I received, but if the horse had kicked me an inch lower, it would have broken my neck. An inch higher, I would have been blind for life. Was she my good luck charm? Was she a daughter in the Schmidt family long dead? Who knows? Thanks for reading. Man, that girl was just tripping balls. She was hallucinating. She turned into a ball man, a ball woman, for life. I don't even know what I'm saying, guys, but hey, comment, like, and subscribe. Oh, by the way, my name is PhantomOfDarkness if you haven't met me before. I usually say you can shake my hand virtually, but I don't have any hands because I'm a phantom. And in my ghost scenario, someone cut off my hands and they sold it to the local telemarketer. I don't even know if that makes sense, but you know what? Why do I keep saying that? Like literally, it's subconscious. I literally just say it and it just comes out. I don't even think about it. It just comes out. I say woo 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 woo, blah 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 and all that. I swear, during this whole recording process of the outro, I was not on drugs and I'm completely sober. At least that's what I tell myself to make myself feel better and sleep well at night. But seriously guys, leave a thumbs up for this video, and even if you didn't like it too much, go ahead and leave a thumbs up anyway. I really like the stories in this one, and I think this is actually one of my favorite stories that I've done. You know, the collection of stories in this video that I've done in a while. I don't know, something about the SS story that we just listened to a second ago, the last story, and the motorcycle stories, and like everything in here was just a really good collection, and I really appreciate actually having the opportunity to narrate to you guys, because seriously, being back at work means a lot to me, and I couldn't be doing this without your support. I mean, this all starts with you guys, and I know I said that before, but I just wanted to reiterate how important that is to me. But anyway, guys, it's important to share this video and let people know that my videos exist, because apparently so many people are getting notifications that they're not getting notifications, if you know what I mean. Just ignore what I just said. Anyway, guys, seriously, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you guys, and just remember, sharing is caring, and that's what I mean when I am being weird. Okay, bye-bye. See ya, guys.